Right there is where the one-room schoolhouse was. And this right here was an old corn crib, only 6 feet wide and 24 feet long. Now it's a barn. And in this area right here, there was a huge junk pile. And down there was just covered in brush. Like there was just a tiny tunnel through here, through the brush, to be able to get to the rest of the property. This right here is our home. 5.6 acres that was once abandoned, neglected, now provides our family of 6 with beef, poultry, milk, eggs, vegetables, and fruit. And not only for us, we also provide milk for multiple families through herd shares with our cow. We sell eggs through a store, and we also sell some of the beef and chicken that we raise too. I want to take you around and show you where all this stuff happens. But first, a little bit about me. When I was 18 years old, if you would have told me that someday I'm gonna be on a homestead like this in Ohio, raising food for my family, milking a cow, having gardens and stuff like that, I would have told you that you were absolutely crazy. I was a skater punk when I was growing up. I was not into this gardening type stuff. I did have a horse, but that's just kind of a completely different thing than raising food for a family. We'll start with the house right here. So like I said, this is where there was a one-room schoolhouse. It wasn't actually used as a one-room schoolhouse when it was on this property. Sometime in the 60s, they built a basement on this property and moved a one-room schoolhouse from about 2 miles down the road and set on this basement and turned it into a house. This property was on the market for a year before we got it. When we got here, I mean, it was wasted. I mean, I'm talking this house was way beyond repair. We tore that down. We built on top of the basement that was already here because that was still usable. And we built this house ourselves. I did get somebody to come blow in the insulation in the walls, but besides that, between me and our family helping us and a couple church frolics, we built this house. There's an interesting little story about almost every part of this house. The doors and windows were free, came from where I work. A bunch of stuff came from an auction, like a really random building surplus auction that just happened to be happening when we were building our house, and just stuff like that. Things that really worked out, because when we started, when we bought this place in 2014, we were living in a basement apartment, living paycheck to paycheck. We hadn't saved up any money. We didn't have any credit. We were able to get a small personal loan to build this. And so to be able to make that happen, we had to get really creative. And we did. And maybe sometime I'll take you on a tour on the inside and show you how it all worked out. But for now, just know that if it's in your heart to do something like that, it can be done. So the house is kind of like at the back corner of the property, one of the corners of the property. So our property is actually in an L shape. It's actually 2 separate parcels that are together, and the house is on the one corner of it. In front of that is the gardens, the front yard area. Then across the driveway, we've got pasture, and then more pasture going back there. And I'll take you back there in a second. First, we'll come to the very back corner here, and this is where Izzy's chickens are. I just did a video about putting the lights in his chicken coop. So this is where his chickens are for the winter. That thing over there is what his chickens are in the summer, being moved around, up around the yard and stuff like that. This here is what we move our broilers around in the spring. So then going up here in front of the house is our gardens. This garden here is what we call our front garden. And basically in the spring, we just got to kind of look at what needs to be planted. If we get a really wet spring, a lot of the garden down there is really wet. So a lot of the times the first stuff gets planted up here. This is our raspberry patch. We got so many raspberries this year.
I think I have more raspberries than anything else.
We got some yard in between, and the reason for that, we would just have it all one big thing, but this is our leach field for our septic system. And here is our other garden. We've got our asparagus patch here that really needs to be cut down. We grow a lot of different stuff out here. Right here's our strawberry patch. And then down there is more garden space. That is kind of a failed hoop house. It would work if we really wanted to. It's something that we never got into, and instead, weeds are growing in there and going to seed and going everywhere and making weed problems for us. So I think this winter I'm actually going to take it down and get rid of it. Next to our garden here we have our garden shed, and this is just a little shed that I built just to put all the little garden tools in. And I had meant for this part here to be like a little greenhouse. Ended up not really working out very well for that, but it works great for a chick brooder when we raise our own chicks. And by the way, while we're over here in this area, this tree right here is an English walnut tree that we planted soon after we got here. And it's growing pretty well. Haven't gotten any nuts off of it yet though. Where all the garden tools get stored, everything along the walls here. We have our tomato cages over there that take up so little space because they're the best tomato cages ever. They're foldable square ones. wheel hose hanging up. I try to be as organized as possible because that's really the only way to make something work when you have a small space. I've got a small garden shed, small barn, we've got a small house, and so you got to really learn to be creative to figure out where to put stuff when you have a homestead. This is a swing that I built this summer for me and Shelly to be able to come out here and sit together and talk, be able to look out over the pastures and the garden. Every homestead needs a spot like this. So now I'll take you beside the garden here. Along the driveway is where we planted our fruit trees. So in this row of trees here, we've got an apple tree, pear tree, 2 more apple trees, then another pear tree, and then 2 more apple trees. The apple trees were all planted at the same time as that nut tree up there, and another nut tree that I'll show you in a little bit. That the nut trees just got way bigger than these apple trees. I don't know what happened there. Then out here by the road is a cherry tree. There were actually some cherries on it this year, but I think the birds all took them away. We also planted a bunch of little evergreen trees along the front of our property. I would just absolutely love to have the front of our property be covered with evergreen trees, and it would feel a lot more private, because right now people drive by on the road and they look in, which is actually kind of cool. I do like to give people that pleasure, because I know a lot of people do like driving by and seeing what we got going on here. But I would still like the privacy out here by the road. So let's just walk where these evergreen trees are along the pasture here. So this is what I call my front pasture. And this is where my cow spends most of her time, just because it's a whole lot easier if she's up in this pasture to get to the barn for milking. But this is divided into 4 sections. I do rotational grazing. Everything is done with electric fence. That's something that's very easy, very cheap, and it works really, really well. I have not had any problems. The first year that I put the fence up, I just did 2 strands of electric, and I did have some calves get out, but I put 3 strands up and I have not had a problem since. The only time I had my cow get out was when I forgot to close the gate one time. I moved my cows to a different pasture and I forgot to close the gate. Now Maddie, I'm not worried about. I can grab a hold of her and take her down there, but Peach is here. Not sure about that one. Get back in there, girl. Oh, girls. Nice jump. Oh, oh. There you go, girl. Something interesting to notice, see how this section right here is more green than the other sections? So this is the last place that the chickens were right before they got moved into their winter housing. Their winter housing is that hoop house right there that's kind of almost attached to the barn. So next up, I'm going to take you to the barn, which was once a corn crib, and show you that and the hoop house that's next to it. And then after that, we'll be going down there. I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing. That's the trail that then goes to our back pasture. So the only thing that wasn't neglected when we bought this property was the fields. The fields were not in pasture, but they were used for farming. It would have been corn and soybeans. So I would have actually preferred that they would have been neglected, because they were being used for farming and being sprayed with chemicals and getting chemical fertilizer and stuff. So like the first couple of years, these pastures were not nice at all, and they still have a long way to go, but they just keep getting better and better every year. And that is so exciting to see that running the cows through rotational grazing and running chickens over this has just made such a huge difference. And I actually have a pretty nice pasture now. Hey Maddie, hey Peaches. I think Peaches is in heat right now, so they're acting a little funny. Really hoping though that Maddie's not in heat, and I don't think she is, because I got Maddie bred about exactly 3 weeks ago, and 3 weeks is how often that they cycle. So I'm really hoping that Maddie is pregnant. Next up here is the barn, and like I said, this was a corn crib. I'll take you inside and you'll be able to see the old rusty walls of the corn crib. It was 6 feet wide, 24 feet long. And what I did was I started out by building a lean-to on the side of the corn crib, and that was just enough. We got a cow pretty early on when we got this place and wasn't really prepared for it, so that was the way that I took care of her, was just had that little lean-to on there. And eventually I put a new roof on top of the old corn crib. I added a lean-to onto that then, so that I have a little shed to put hay and other stuff. It's kind of a mess in there right now. And then after that, I added another lean-to onto this one, so that I've got more of an open corral area. And then I've got sliding doors on the barn so I can close off those stalls. And then I'm able to just utilize this way more just with this extra roof on here. Even though it's completely open, it's just way nicer in the winter for the cows to have that extra roof space. Inside of the barn here, like I said, here's the rusty old corn crib walls. And these steel posts here, some of them were rusted off at the bottom, but most of them were really sturdy, and it worked out just fine to basically rehab this thing in to be used as a barn. So in here I've got my feed storage for my chickens and my cow, and over in here is what I call my milking stall. This is where her stanchion is for milking, and over there is an open stall just for her to be able to get inside. I've got her minerals over there and a hay rack on the wall. This barn here was built probably cheaper than any barn you have ever seen. I'm guessing I didn't spend more than about $1,000, maybe $2,000 on it. Basically what that was the roof metal. Some of the roof metal was left over from building the house. Some of it was stuff that I got cheap from somebody who just needed to get rid of it. That's what pretty much all of the white sides were. Some of it I had to buy new, but besides that, like all of the rafters and walls and everything like that came from either 70% off at Home Depot or scrap piles or pallets or things like that. This here is a hazelnut tree that we planted. We've actually gotten a few nuts out for that one. And then over here is the other English walnut tree that we planted, and that one just got super big. So down here at the end of the barn is the hoop house where the chickens spend the winter. This hoop house is another thing that I did on my own. I did not buy hoops for this. I made this out of 2x4s. The plastic goes on top of that. Everything's pretty much built with scrap lumber. I used some scrap lumber, again, out of my father-in-law's veal barn for the walls. I put 4x4 posts in the ground. I did have to buy those and put the walls up so that I was thinking maybe sometime we would get pigs and put them in here after the chickens were in here to turn up the bedding. That hasn't happened yet, but maybe sometime in the future. One big thing on Homestead to make things easier and more efficient is to have water in all the strategic places. So I've got a hydrant out by the garden, one down here by the hoop house for the chickens' water during the winter, and then one up by the barn for the cows' water. That is super important. For the first few years, more like about 5 or 6 years that we were here, I only had one water spigot on the outside of the house I had to fill buckets with and take it to all the animals. Such a pain. It took some money, took some time, but very well worth it. Also down here by the end of the hoop house is our compost piles and the dog's kennel. Hey, cowboy. Hey, boy. Good boy, cowboy. Good boy, cowboy. So to give you some perspective real quick, that's the hoop house. That's the trail that goes down to the back pasture. And then this right here is the kids' fort that I built for them. Tree house, but without being in a tree, so it's up on stilts. They've got swings underneath, and eventually I want to have a slide coming off of that side of the porch, but it's really hard to find a slide that long, so I might actually end up building one myself. This is something like I always wanted when I was growing up, so I wanted to make sure that happened for my kids. It's been kind of a build over time. I built part of it and added more stuff. There's still little loose ends to tie up here and there. I do have plans to insulate it in here and then cover the walls so that it could be kept warm if we wanted to do a camp out or something in here in the winter. And now from here, we're gonna head on down this trail around the corner, and that's like the corner of the L of our property, and head to the back pasture. And we'll also stop at the beehives on our way back there. This thing isn't normally right here in the middle of the trail. This is the egg wagon that the chickens have to be out on pasture during the summer, but I brought it back here and set it right here because I want to use it for a hunting blind. So me and Izzy come and sit down here to hunt, and the deer come on that trail right there. So I decided, why not just set this egg wagon right here, sit inside there and be able to shoot out of that little window. Over right beside that, I've got my tractor stuff. I really wish I had a shed to put the implements in because they're just getting rusty and stuff out here. But I do have a shed to put my tractor in. This actually was the very first like mobile egg wagon thing that I built here. It didn't work out the greatest as an egg wagon, but it had been used to raise chickens in then later and stuff. And now it's my little tractor shed. And then across from that is what we call Woodpecker Hollow, and that's where we keep our bees. I bought one package of bees this spring, and then I caught a swarm, and then I ended up splitting one, so I've got 3 hives now, and I'm hoping to keep expanding. Probably won't buy any more, but I'm hoping to catch swarms. I've got 3 swarm traps that I set up, hoping to catch some more next spring. So right behind the beehives here, you can see kind of like a brushy area. Right on the other side of that is basically a swamp. So that is a part of our property we can't really use for anything during like really wet springs, and if it's really wet in the fall, it floods back here. Parts of the year it's dry. I think it's dry right now, but a lot of the year it's flooded back here. So right here, we're at the end of this pasture, and then we're gonna head down this trail to the back field. Since this is surrounded by trees on 3 sides, there's not near as much light pollution, and the stars are absolutely amazing. So this is our back pasture. This is this corral that I built earlier this spring to be able to separate the cow and the calf when I had them back here this year. This is divided into 3 sections right now for rotational grazing. It had been divided into 6, but it was just really annoying to have a divider going across that way and needing to take their water all the way down there because I don't have a hydrant back here. This was too far for me to do. Eventually maybe I will, but I still bring buckets back here for them when they're back here. But really probably what I'd like to do is just keep the paddocks the long way like this, but just maybe make it into 4 or 5 long strip sections so that I can still have that common area up front, but have more sections, because 3 sections and this size of an area with just 1 or 2 cows is not the greatest for a good rotation. That tree row on that side, the edge of that field right there, and then this tree row on this side, and this is our back pasture. The grass in this pasture back here is even nicer than the one in the front. It was farmed just like the one in the front, and I'm not sure what it is about it. Like I said before, it just keeps getting better every year, and it just goes to show what you can do with a piece of property that looks like it might not be worth much, might not be able to do much with it, but with some grit, some hard work, some determination, and some dreams, you can just about make anything happen.
Just loving this moment. Can we stay here forever? I'm loving this moment. Can we stay here together? If I could stop the time, don't you know